You don't need to prepare anything, man. Like, it's just a conversation. We're not like the BBC.
Yeah.
We're not in Media City, But I guess we're gonna need to do like a little public service announcement, aren't we? And a little PSA of
Yeah.
this two Mancs just kind of having a little bit of a chinwag now. So if we go off on a tangent and start talking about the motherland,
Yeah.
please tune into a more educational podcast. Fucking we. All right, man. Like, I mean, I guess, do you want to give your background?
My background in terms of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, man.
My name's David Proctor. I am, I'm an international athlete. My background for this was that I attended university in the United States on track scholarship, and that was over in Boston University. And I've pretty much been running my entire life. Way back in the day, I was a national junior champion, which is, I guess, how they knew me at Boston. Offered me the opportunity to go out there on full ride, and that's one of those opportunities you don't turn down, is it?
No,
so
no.
Took that, went out to Boston, and I was quite happily out there doing my own thing, training, racing, until things kind of hit the fan, and I ended up with whole full-on eating disorder, which I think is what we're going to be talking about, right?
First of all, what were you doing on the track?
On the track, I'm a middle distance athlete. So I do 800 meters, mile, 1500 meters, occasionally 3Ks, but even 3K is a little bit far from me.
Like 1500 meters is savage, my friend.
Mm-hmm. It's the perfect combination of speed, endurance, and it's a whole mental game as well.
Like being like holding that pace, that's absolutely disgusting, and you will not see me do that. I do 2 reps and I'm gassed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, I was a sprinter, so all I did was do the fast stuff and the short stuff, and then I kind of ended up growing up a little bit and realizing I had a little bit of endurance, so kind of putting it to the test, and then it turns out this is what I'm best at. But you'll never catch me do a marathon. I'll commit to that now. I don't think I'll ever do a marathon. It's too far from me.
Never say never, brother. Like I've done the Manchester Marathon.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can do it, you can do it, brother.
I'm not sure I could. I used to do long runs as part of my training, but it wasn't. I never enjoyed it. I wasn't sure I could do it.
I mean, you'll get through it. Like I think most people can. I think pretty much like 95% of the population could finish a marathon. It's just whether you run it all.
I know it's one of those, like, I could probably finish a marathon. I could get to the end of it and finish it, but knowing how competitive I am, like, I wouldn't want to just finish. I'd want to do it well, and if I don't do it well, then it wouldn't count for me.
Yeah, and then you'd have to do it again, and then the next thing you know, you've done 5. It's down a right
suddenly a marathon runner, and I don't want
it. Yeah, yeah. Best keep that in its glass jar rather than taking off the cap. You know what I mean? Yeah, man. So, developing this eating disorder, right? Was this a time when eating disorders were kind of like a taboo, hush hush? No one really spoke about it. Did you have any idea it was occurring? Did you seek any help, or did someone just turn around to you one day and was like, brother, like, something's wrong?
Yeah, well, I guess to answer that, I've got to start with how it actually came about in the first place. And I was probably about 13, 14 weeks into the first semester there. So I was still very new in the country, still sort of first time I'd ever been away from home, been away from my mum, basically the person that did absolutely everything for me. She did all my cooking, all my cleaning and everything. So in terms of food, meals just appeared on the table. I never even thought about it before. I didn't even know the difference between like a protein and carbohydrate. What is that? What's the difference? Got out to the States and suddenly I'm fending for myself, and they've got the dining hall and I'm pretty much able to eat whatever I want. So I do, and I take on the freshman 15, right? So I had a freshman 15. And I must have got, like, say, 13, 14 weeks into the first semester. And my coach just comes over to me one day in the middle of practice with everyone around. All the other guys on the team are there. All the girls on the team are there. And he basically puts his arm around me and pats me on the stomach. And he's like, oof, you're enjoying that American food, or something to that effect. And I always say at this point, like, my coach is not a bad guy, not a bad person at all. Like, he didn't do that maliciously, didn't do it with any intention to hurt me. I think it was just his perception of the best way of dealing with something when he's talking to one of the guys. Like, we make a joke about it, we laugh and joke about it. And I didn't take it that way. I think he intended it to be sort of like a bit of a laugh and just like, go and sort yourself out, go on, get on with it. He probably dealt with it very, very differently with the women on the team. But in that moment when he did that to me, I was a failure, right? Like, he'd basically invested in me for this track scholarship, paying 50 grand a year for me to go out there and compete for the team. And in that moment, in front of everyone, very public sort of, you're letting me down, you're a failure, I'm paying all this money and you're not doing what I expect of you. That was the emotion that went through me at that point. So I guess at that point, I didn't suddenly instantly get an eating disorder, but I kind of fell into a pattern of, what do I need to do to correct what I perceive as being wrong? And I pretty much lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks, because in my head, I'm an all or nothing. And I end up I just flipped that switch in my head. And I was like, I have got to get this weight off. I've got to do it. 20 pounds in 2 weeks.
You lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm. I literally stopped eating. I must have been eating less than 500 calories a day for about 2 weeks, and it just fell off me.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And even then, at that point, that you get 2 weeks in, I'm absolutely knackered. I've got no energy whatsoever. I can't really do the training, but at least my body weight's right. Couldn't do anything, but I didn't even then think I had a problem. To me, this was a necessary thing to do. It was a necessary evil. Coach had told me that I was too heavy. I had to do everything that I could do to not be so heavy. And this was just one of those things that I did. And I kind of got to the point where I was trying to lose weight and continually trying to lose more and more weight, and ended up just tired, not able to cope. And then one day, Paula came in to speak to the team. And I don't know if she talked about how she kind of got into this, but at the time she just came in as a nutritionist to talk to the men's track and field team to say, this is nutrition, it's proteins, carbohydrates, just really basic nutrition stuff. And I went up to her at the end of that to say, trying to lose weight, can you help me? I think she was expecting me to go up and say, can you help me gain weight or, be healthier with this? But I actually went up looking for help on losing weight when I was probably about 9 stone.
Bloody hell. Let me convert that to kilos. Hold on. I work in kilos these days, man.
Kilos, 60 something, 62 maybe.
57, man.
Oosh.
Ooh,
light.
Jesus. How tall are you?
6 feet.
6 foot.
So my BMI was something like 17 and bits.
Jeez. Okay, so like, put it in the context for people, because there'll be a lot of strength athletes kind of listening in, right? Like, you can't really compare the weight that you'd need for your sport for a strength athlete. They're going to be a lot heavier. Granted, there's weight categories, but they're going to be a lot heavier than you are. That's just should be common knowledge, but it is now.
Yeah.
But 57 kilos at 6 foot, that's insane. There's nothing on you at that point. Like, how are you able to get through a training session without like conking out and blacking out?
I was still very much sort of the new freshman on the team, so we weren't doing intense training. We weren't doing like big volume. So I was getting through things. I think it was just a case of the tiredness of it, which again I thought was just part of the new training regime that I was under, just part of the new team. So I struggled, but speaking to Paula, I tried to get her to help me lose even more weight, because that was the necessary evil. That's what had to happen. My coach told me so. That's what I've got to do. And that's how our relationship started, really, is that she was trying to get it across to me that, the way that you're thinking is not necessarily the right way to be thinking at this point around your weight and how to compete.
So talk to me about the all or nothing mindset of an athlete, right? Because I get that 100%. Right, like me and Paula spoke yesterday, and I was like, not a lot of people understand that like athletes will legitimately die doing their sport, and will be like, yep, that was a necessary evil. It's talk to me about what you were thinking during that time. You said it was a necessary evil, right? But like, what was like the emotion that was going through? You just like suck it up and just do this.
Yeah, because like I said, the coach had paid all this money for me to be out there and be on the team. That's what scholarships are for, paying for your education, paying for your housing, paying for your food, all paid for. So they've made this investment in you. you better be as good as they want you to be. And when he came over and basically said to me, you know, sort this out, excuse me, to me, that was a failure. So I had to do everything that I could to be back where he wanted to be, back where justifying my position on the team, justifying this amount of money that was being spent on me.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things that was like, if being a certain weight to run faster is how to do it, then I've got to do it. I didn't yet realize that my mindset had slipped into eating disorder. For me, this was just part of the commitment. This was part of the dedication. This is what elite athletes do. And obviously moving out to the States to do this training and do this competition was part of the big dream, right? This was going to get me to the Olympics. It was going to get me to world records and all the rest of it. So I had to do whatever I had to do. The guy that I was looking up to, now my new coach, was saying, your weight isn't impacting your performance. It's influencing how well you're going to do. Sort it out. So I just had to do everything I could to sort it out. And at this point, like I said, I didn't know what a protein, carbohydrate was, barely knew what a calorie was. So I was obviously doing damage to myself and pretty much in a state of ignorance.
Wow. So as a side note, like coming from the coach's perspective, I think that's why the job is so difficult, because you have to be able to portray yourself in a way that you need to hear it, not the way that I want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you have to get inside the mind of the athletes, every single one of them as an individual, and be able to portray yourself in a way that they can then dissect in a positive manner. Right. And then that's difficult because you've just come from home, you've flown over to the States, you jumped across the pond, you're new, they don't know who you are. Personality wise, you don't know who they are. Personality wise, like that's super difficult. And it's kind of like a be careful note to all like kind of young coaches of like, you could say something, right, and it could stay with them for the rest of their life and end up hindering them and whatever. However, on the flip side, you could also say something and it could go the other way. Like it could stay with them and they use it every day, and it's a positive thing. So, you know, words are your weapons.
And do you know what? I think that's exactly what my coach was trying to do, actually.
Yeah.
Like I said, he was a good man. He passed away a few years, unfortunately, but he was a good man, and he always wanted the best for the athletes. And I think that when he came and he did that as a guy on a team of other guys, I think he thought that was the best way to approach it. Make a joke of it, have a bit of a laugh about it, off he'll go and sort himself out on his way. So I think he knew that. I think he knew that words are your weapon, because he wouldn't say that to a girl. He wouldn't go over to the girls on the team and do that, because he knew that they would just mentally break them. He thought for me, it was going to be just have a laugh, have a joke, off you go, sort yourself out, and you'll be back. But actually, I interpreted it more as, because it was very public as well, everybody have a look at this guy who's failing us. Everybody look at this guy on the team who's come here from England, he's flown over to be part of this team. What a failure. So I obviously took that personally, and I didn't then interpret it as becoming an eating disorder. Like I said, it was a necessary evil to get to where I needed to be. But when you kind of slowly start to lose control over what you're doing and it becomes something else, it evolves slowly into an eating disorder for me. And when I realized that, that's when the treatment could begin.
And you said a really important word of discipline. You know, most athletes end up going down that route and be like, no, I'm just being like super disciplined. It's hustle, it's hard work, it's work ethic. You know what I mean? And you're like, yes, to an extent, but it's also a pendulum, right? As soon as it gets to that middle, it kind of goes to the other side. You're like, now you're swinging the other way. Now you've gone way too far. And like the mindset of an athlete is there is no too far, right?
Yep.
The too far.
And
is
I always talk about the differences between men and women as well, because you see a man going through the same thing as a woman. It's, you know, if they both starving themselves for performance benefits or whatever it is, you would see you'd look at the woman and say, oh, she's got an eating disorder, she's got a problem, why is she so skinny, what's her problem? But you'd see the guy and you'd be like, wow, he's so committed to what he's doing, he's so dedicated to his sport, he really wants to be part of it. That's how it is. And that's how I would mask it when I went home to talk to my family, because they obviously noticed a shift in me. Like I came home and all I wanted was salads or vegetables or fruits, and I didn't even want that much of that. When I was back home, it was sort of like, no, I appreciate your concern, but this is what distance runners do. This is what elite runners do. Like I'm just living the dream. Like this is how it is. And they would believe me. I imagine that if I was female and I went home and tried to say the same thing, they would be like, no, you've got a problem and you need to sort yourself out. So the biggest barrier, I think, is this stigma that eating disorders are a female problem. It's a female's issue. Because one, people think that they can talk to you however you want. And I still train to this day with a coach who thinks it's okay to speak to the men and call them fat and tell them to go insult themselves. It's 2022 and he still does it. But he wouldn't dare say the same thing to the girls. And he openly says it to me. Nah, it's eating problems. It's for skinny girls. It's a woman's problem. You'll be fine. And that is such a common problem. I think it needs to be addressed, and people need to realize that the men can be just as vulnerable, especially if they are as committed to excelling in their sport as the women are. Works both ways.
That's an incredible point, man. Like, and I'd love for you to go down that rabbit hole, mate, and just blurt out what you want to blurt out, you know, like honestly, man, I
could. I
mean, don't
do a whole other
don't get yourself fired and shit.
I know, yeah, you start bordering on sort of toxic masculinity and all of that side of it as well, because that's another whole thing to talk about. But it is a problem, because I think I could technically get away with it longer, just because people see it as dedication from a man, whereas it would be seen as a problem for a woman. And men are almost immune to it. Men are immune to it because you can go over to a man and you can tell them, man up, get on with it, and you just expect them to do it, and they would expect to do it as well. So yeah. And
also physiologically, like, males can walk around at a lower body fat percentage than females, right? So technically, like, if we started at the same point, say for example we started at 20%, 30% body fat, right, then you'd be able to go down a little bit further relative to your weight and size, simply because we can actually survive on less. I think it's like the least that we can actually have on the body is about 2%. Don't quote me on it, but I think it's around about 2%. Anything less than that, you actually start shutting down and dying.
I'll give you a nice fact, because I know that Paul quotes this one, so I know that I'm saying something scientifically accurate. I believe that the critical amount of body fat that you have, that you can possibly have, is about 3%.
Wow.
And I remember this because there was one point where I went for a DEXA scan and I had my full body fat, my body count done. And it came out to something like 3.1%. And the next time I went in to speak to Paula the next day, how do I lose that 1% so that I can be perfect, spot on at 3%? This is the mindset that I had. And at that point, I was probably still, 57 kilos, 6 feet, desperately trying to lose as much weight as I could whilst not starving to death. That was the mindset. That was where my head was at that point. It's crazy to think now, like that. If I had a 3.1% body fat now, I think I would probably see it as a bit of a problem. Like, I need to sort myself out. But at the time, how do I take off that 0.1% so that I can be this perfect specimen of an athlete? But the thing is, if I'd have got to 3%, you know what my next goal would have been?
Yeah.
How do I get down to 2.9? So it's that never-ending cycle. You're kind of pushing it a little bit to see how far you can get. And then once you get there, well, if I'm here and I'm running well, what happens if I just take it a little bit further? And once I get there and I'm still running okay, what happens if I just take it a little bit further? And it's that constant chase for perfection. You're chasing perfection, but you don't actually know what perfection is. So how do you ever reach it? How do you ever reach it?
And it's also the law of individuality. Like, your perfection, say for example, we're both runners, right? I know it's really hard to picture me running, but let's just do it for argument's sake. And your perfection, quote unquote, your ideal peak performance weight to run around with is about 6%, right? Just throwing a random number out there. But mine might be 9, 10%, right? And then it kind of plays on the whole psychological of like, okay, looking around, well, what they're doing. Well, I might have to starve myself a hell of a lot more just to get to your normal weight, never mind like anything else, right? And at 6 feet, going down sub 60 kilos, that's still fucked me up. That's crazy, man. Like 57 kilos at 6 foot tall. Like, I'm 5'10" on a good day, right? If I get to 80, I look like a skinny motherfucker. Drop another 23 kilos, I'm like, there's no way.
And it's what is the perception of what is perfect? Do you know what I mean? Because in my head, it was just one of those where I pretty much made like the black and white statement: skinnier equals faster. So it was almost like the skinnier you can get, the faster you'll go. And that's infinitely the case. Like if I keep getting skinnier, faster, there was no in my head, no critical point where everything just falls off and you don't compete anymore. Looking back on it now and knowing what I know now, my perfect is actually probably something more like 70 kilos. And I've performed at my best when I've been about 70 kilos, which is 150-ish pounds, 154, 155 pounds. So I know that is my perfect now, because that's, for me, is the perfect balance between being light enough to be able to do the mileage and do the training, but also having enough energy reserves to do the training sessions and recover from them afterwards. So I know that now, but at the time we were chasing a perfection that I believed was entirely linked to my weight. And I think that's where we first started with with my treatment on it, was kind of to prove to myself that my beliefs were right. Because the idea actually was that by trying to prove it, I would in effect disprove myself. I remember a specific session that I had with Paul at one time. We were talking about eating lunch, right? Because in my head, I eat something in the morning to take that edge off the hunger when I woke up. And then I obviously had to have dinner, because that's like the biggest meal of the day. And you've got to have your dinner or your tea, as we say up here.
Yeah.
But lunch was the sin for me. Lunch was the one we don't do, because food in the middle of the day, I don't need it. I'm having my breakfast, I'm having my dinner, I don't need it. I remember having a conversation with Paula where she said, what would happen if we ate lunch? And I told her, well, I'd just be so bloated and so swollen and so fat that I wouldn't be able to do the training session in the evening. So I'm not doing it. I'm not bothering with it. And she kind of tried to convince me that just wasn't the case. It's like, that's just not going to be the case. That you're going to have more energy to do the session. This is going to be a good thing. Lunch is a good thing. And I remember in my head getting quite annoyed with her and saying, like, right, fine, Paula, fine. I'll eat lunch. I'll go and eat lunch. And then I'll come back here the day after and I'll show you how fat I am. And I'll show you how swollen I am. And I'll tell you how shit this training session was, basically. And I'll prove you wrong. So you want me to eat lunch so much? Watch this. I'll go and do it. So I did it, went and had lunch. And I only went and had the best training session of the year, didn't I? So it was one of those where, like, I had to crawl back to her the next day and be like, you know what you were saying about like extra calories during the day? Okay, Paula, fine. It was true and it worked. But that for me was like the most powerful thing, because it was proof. I'm a scientist by background. I went out there to study medicine. I went out there to study the human body just to help with my running, whatever it was. And having that proof, having that scientific proof of like, okay, well, I basically put my body through a test. It came out the other side and this was the outcome. That for me was that first trigger where I had to kind of prove to myself that more calories equals more energy equals more running. It kind of didn't matter about the weight. Wow. And that was like the first step for me. I remember that day vividly, because from there it was only ever recovery from there. But that was the kickoff for me, proving it to myself.
Wow. I think proving it to yourself is paramount for an athlete, right? Like you could say whatever you want. You're like, but I didn't run sub whatever. I didn't score 5 tries. I didn't make more meters, because we can quantify it, right? Like we get stats, especially over in the States, they record everything, right? And everything is like a test. Back home, the S&Cs are like 20 years behind. It's not that great, but I mean, the States is fantastic, but it also poses a lot of issues of like, we can fall into that trap. So if we use it in a constructive manner rather than a destructive manner, in a sense of, David, like, this is what you ran. Okay, yeah, fine. Now try this, and we can see whether you actually got better. Oh, now this is how you ran. Plus, you've got the subjective data too. It's like, how did you feel? Felt fucking great. Felt like the best training session of my life. You're like, what's the difference here, mate? You're like, oh, okay. You kind of have to treat us like dumb animals, right? As children, because they're there for one job and one job only. Whether it's a team sport or whether it's an indie sport, it doesn't matter. Athletes are like so single-minded. The mind of an athlete is a spectacular thing, right? And it's a really, really, really hard thing to end up unraveling and helping, because they're so unbalanced.
Yeah. And I know that Paula will probably have said a lot of things about trust and being able to gain trust when she's working with people. And that was huge for me. And at that, like I said before, I didn't even know the difference between a carbohydrate and a protein, right? So a lot of what we did in the early days was about education and understanding how these different things interact with your body and what they're for and what they do. So that's fine. She was more of a teacher. When we kind of got to the point where it was like, right, fine, I'll prove you wrong, she was a bit of a therapist, because she got into my head a little bit and wound me up to the point where I was like, right, shut up, Paula, watch this. I'll show you how bad it is. Went and did it. But then when I came back and she was absolutely right, that was the point then where it became more than just kind of education and therapy. It became like, she became confident. Like everything that I said to her, I knew she would take on board, and I knew that what she would tell me would be the truth, and it would be her genuine interpretation of what was best for me. Once you've got that trust, then you're away. Everything she says, I'm willing to try. Every little test that she wants me to do on my body, like, you want, go away and prove me wrong, have a little bit extra at breakfast this time. Okay, fine, I'll take your word for it this time. Once you've got that trust in place, then that's when you're away.
I love going down that rabbit hole of gaining trust of an athlete, because I've coached for a long time, right? And gaining the trust of an athlete, and then because you're manipulating another human being to get them a desired response, right? That's essentially what you're doing, right? You have to get into the head of someone and make them do shit that they don't want to do, right? And I think getting that trust, whether it's from a dietitian, a therapist point of view, whether it's a coach's point of view, whether it's a teammate's point of view, it's all coaching, right? It's all like helping out. It's all a confidant, like you said, and trying to get into that position. Like, I find that shit fascinating, man.
Yeah, and it's not just trying to get someone to do what you want them to do. It's trying to switch someone's understanding, and you changing someone's beliefs from something that is dangerous and harmful to something that is actually beneficial to them and is the best sort of belief and direction for them as a person. So it's not manipulative, it's assistive. Okay,
I see that side. I mean, most of the time you don't want to.
We were on the same team. It's not like Paul wasn't just trying to get me to eat food for the sake of eating food, right? She was trying to get me into a position that was healthy for me and eating right for my sport. Because there were times where during the recovery I had relapses, but between those relapses I went completely the opposite direction. Like I ate too much, I gained too much weight, and I slowed down again. So kind of, it's not just a case of eat because that's what humans do, eat. It's like, what does she call it? A healthy, competent eater.
Competent eater, yeah.
Eat correct for you, eat right for you as a sport, eat right for you as a man, eat right for you as someone who's 6 feet tall. Like all of these things that are specific to me is not just what Paula wants me to do, it's what's right for me, and I have to realize that, and I have to believe it myself. And the only way I, as a person anyway, was going to believe it was that proof to myself.
She planted the seed too, man.
Oh yeah,
planted the seed, and then basically just gave it a little water, and you did the growing. Because obviously,
and that's exactly what it needed to be.
Yeah, exactly. Like rather than it being forced, and no, like the other way around. Like rather than, hey, someone looks like someone's enjoyed themselves over in American food, rather than just like, oh, hey, it looks like someone's not enjoying themselves in American food, and then you just yo-yo, right?
Yeah,
and then you're there to do one job and one job only, and you're not doing your job.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's the point, is that these people that engage in treatment for eating disorders, they miss the one thing that I always say is kind of like my number one rule or my number one thing to remember as you're approaching this, and that's the why. Like, what is your why? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you behaving this way? And I know that she's spoken to a lot of female athletes who will say things like, I just want to be healthy, I want to be fit, I want to run fast, I want to do this, I want to compete, I want to train, blah, blah, blah. The real why was actually that they wanted to be skinny and look good in a dress. And until you acknowledge that, like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, if that's how you want to live your life, that's fine. But until you acknowledge that, you're not going to treat that, because your treatment will center around performance, which will include eating. It will center around fitness and health, which involves eating, and staying skinny to look good in a dress is not going to be covered by that. So for me, the why was obviously elite level performance. And my belief was that skinnier equals faster. So that's where my head was, and that's where my relationship with food centered around. Slowly over time, we shifted through proving it to myself, shifting that to say, actually, when you fuel yourself and you eat more, your performance increases. So it doesn't really matter whether you're skinny or not. It doesn't matter what the number is on the scale. It doesn't matter what your body looks like, because if it performs right, why does it matter what it looks like?
Mm.
And as soon as I got that in my head, it's like, why am I trying to do this? It's for performance, but actually eating calories equals performance. So being skinny is not part of that. To get to that point took years, but once I got there, that for me was when I was kind of in my head recovered, because my focus had changed, my why had changed. Like I knew why it was I was doing what I was doing. I also knew why what I was doing was wrong. And I always say this to people when they're trying to engage in this kind of treatment, like, know what your why is and be honest about it. Because if you're talking to therapists or anyone that's trying to help you, if you're not honest about why you want to do it, the treatment isn't going to work because it's going to focus on the wrong thing.
Mm. Clearly defining your why in everything in life is only ever going to help you, right? And now putting it into the place of putting yourself in a vulnerable position, right? Kind of acknowledging that, hey, I might have a little bit of a flaw here, right? And I also need a little bit of help. And this bleeds off into the conversation of men's eating disorders. Talk to me about that, brother. Why do you think it's so like stigmatized?
I honestly think it's just because it's seen as a woman's problem, and it's why there should be shame for a man doing something that is specific to a woman. Again, we could go down all sorts of different rabbit holes around that side. It comes back to toxic masculinity again. But if you think about it from a man's perspective, it's very, if you've got a problem, if you've got a mental disorder, if you've got, psychological mental health issues, in a way that's weakness. In a way that's seen as weakness, and especially for men, like, you're not allowed to talk about that. It's a huge push, isn't there, around the world now for men's mental health, because it's okay not to be okay, as if you need to say that to someone. Like, if you don't feel happy or great on any given day, like, that doesn't make you weak, it doesn't make you a bad person, but there is that element of masculinity around it where you have to be strong at all times and you have to be happy at all times, because if you're not, then you're weak and therefore you're not a real man. And I think that's where the shame and the stigma comes in on this side. And I kind of didn't want to be public about it, and that's why I felt like I could hide it. Again, it goes back to what I was saying before. I kind of got away with it and I hid it because I buried it behind commitment and dedication. But I do think that's why people would say, that's it's not a man's problem, it's a woman's problem, and in some kind of way that would be that's the end of it. We don't need to talk about it anymore. It's a woman's problem, so therefore it can't affect you. It's insane.
I think it does. I agree. I think it does relate to toxic masculinity. And I use that term like kind of lightly, because what the fuck does that even mean? You know what I mean? I think that's it goes in many different ways, but I agree in the sense of, oh no, you can't deal with that. That's a psychological issue that deals with your emotions too. And you're a man, you don't have emotions. You got two emotions, fight and fuck. That's it. You're like, wait, hold on a minute. Like, let's look at this from, a super kind of extracted view of like, well, you're a human being, right? You're a living organism. That means you're going to have the capability to do everything that is in life and consciousness, which means you're going to be able to feel these things. And then you also put yourself in a seriously high stress environment, using yourself as an example of, you've left home, you've got a scholarship, you're going to be a student athlete, i.e. now you've got two roles, you've got two fucking jobs. You got to be a student and you got to be an athlete. You got to perform, and you've also got to perform in the classroom. So the stress is like amplified, right? And now you're put in a position, whether it was clearly not purposely, you're just put in a position where, oh, I'm not performing how I should, right? And in a way that I'm used to, and how the coaches want me to perform. I'm like, oh, okay. And it just gets exacerbated, and next thing you know, boom, now you've got a serious problem. And the complete arrogance of a lot of dudes, right? Where we can acknowledge, okay, yep, that's a stressor, that's going to make it a lot worse. This is going to make everything a lot worse. Yep. And then we get to the conclusion of, hey, we might have an issue here. Nah, fuck that. We don't have an issue. You're like, we're not like gods. You know what I mean? We're just dudes, man. And in fact, we're the dumber part of the species. Right.
Yeah. And right from the start, again, like I said, I never really saw it as a problem. And I remember we were trying to deal with my treatment from sort of a psychology side as well. So I had to go and speak to a therapist. And I did not like that. And I hated it for weeks and weeks and weeks, because to me, you see a therapist when you've got mental health problems, like when you are mentally ill, when you have a psychological disorder. All of these terms that in my head had so much like negative connotations to them. I didn't believe that I had a mental illness. I didn't believe that I had a problem, because what I was doing was necessary.
Yeah.
Right. Distance runners are skinny and they run faster when they're skinny. I'm not trying to lose weight because I'm mentally ill. I'm not eating because I'm mentally ill. I'm not eating because I'm trying to perform. So for me, like, to have that whole idea that actually I'm not in control of this now that I've got a mental illness, that I've got a problem, didn't sit well with me. But there's a very specific story I tell when I knew finally that I didn't have control of it anymore. And it's that I kind of had to come to terms with it and realize that I had a problem. And it was more than just trying to be skinny for the sake of my running. Because I went home for Christmas and pretty much indulged in the Christmas festivities as you usually do when you go home and you eat as much turkey as you can. But then I didn't eat for 3 days after that.
Holy
and on that third day, I decided, as my last little bit of compensation for the, punishing myself for what I did at Christmas, I went out for a 20-mile run, having not really eaten, not eaten for 3 days. And I must have got to about 14 or 15 miles into it. And I ended up blacking out, passing out at the side of the road and waking up with cars parked around me and people trying to wake me up and all the rest of it. It was scary. And I just told people, I was just really tired. I'll be fine. I'll get on with it. Again, not trying to show any weakness. But when I did finally get back home, and I was like, wow, you've not eaten for 3 days to punish yourself for what you did at Christmas, which is Christmas. Like, everyone can eat on Christmas, right? And I realized, like, I don't have control of this anymore, because I'm not doing this for performance. Because if I was, I wouldn't be hurting myself to the point where I pass out the side of the road. So that was at the point where I was like, I'm not in control of this anymore. I realized I didn't have control of it. And it was far more important to me to count the calories and see the number that was on the scale than it was to perform well and to run fast, because it wasn't about that anymore. It just became about the scales and the numbers. So that was then where we started to do this work on focusing on my why and shifting my why, so that it didn't become about the numbers on the scale. It became about the numbers on the clock at the end of the race. So I had to shift that focus. It's really important to understand that why, because I lost that in the middle. And when I lost that control, that's when I realized it's a problem now, become a problem.
Brother, thank you for sharing that story, man. That's deeply personal, and that's heavy, man. Like putting yourself through that for 3 days and then absolutely railing yourself and attempting to do practically, you said you don't do run marathons, you were 6 mile off of your ambition, right? Like that's crazy, and that is a massive telltale sign of, hey, dude, you having a conversation with yourself. Hey, dude, maybe we need to go take this a little bit more seriously than we were doing.
And it's just a shame that I had to get to the point of almost like, I could have backed out in the middle of traffic. I could have been hit by cars when I passed out. I could have hit my head on anything when I've fallen down. Like, that could have gone so much worse. And it's a real shame that I had to get to that point for me to kind of say, you're not in control of this anymore. But you lose focus on it. You lose sight of it, and it becomes something else.
Yeah,
it was about losing weight to perform. And it should always been about losing enough weight to get to the right race weight and then stay healthy and stay performing. But you go beyond that and it becomes about something else. And like I said, all or nothing, I'm very focused on numbers. And if I went to bed one night and I weighed 149.9, I would be infinitely more happy than if I went to bed weighing 150.1. And that's where my focus ended up being. And once you realize that, it's like, it's not about running anymore. Like, why am I doing this? It's not about running anymore.
So if someone was listening to this, right, who is struggling but hasn't spoken to anybody, so a rate at the start, because you would have had an inkling, right? You're like, maybe, right? What would you say to them?
it's about being honest with yourself right from the very start. And that still brings in that why. And it always brings in the why, because you say I would have had an inkling. I actually didn't, because like I said, I got to a certain weight and I thought, I'm just going to keep going with this. And the first day I met Paul, that was my first question to her. I was, what do you say, 57 kilos? How can I lose more weight? Because I'm not perfect yet. How can I lose more weight? So I guess I didn't have the inkling that I had a problem at that point, but that what you're doing isn't necessarily the healthiest, right? Because I guess everyone's raised that they like to eat, like you've got to eat. And if you don't eat, then there's something not right about that. So you have an inkling that if you are restricting yourself for whatever reason, it's not the most desirable thing, because it's not pleasant when you're hungry, is it? Like when you're starving, it's not pleasant. So something's not right. I always try to bring focus back to the why. So if anyone is listening and they've not spoken to anyone about it and they've not had any sort of thoughts about this before, if you feel like your eating is not where you would want it to be, like if you wish you could eat more but you can't, if you wish you could do this but you really don't want to, just in case, if you wish you could eat something but that's not for you because it will make you fat, why do you think that? What's made you think that, and what will you get out of it by not doing that? And again, if it's just about looking a certain way, being skinny, there's ways of doing that where you can eat. And what we need, let's have a conversation about what is your ideal weight. How do you want to look? What do you want to achieve by doing all of this? But it always comes back to the why. Why are you engaging in these behaviors? And that's the first place to start talking and thinking about it. Even if you can't figure it out yourself, speak to someone and they can help you.
It's powerful as well, man. You have self-awareness of where you're at right now and where you want to be. And I think self-awareness is a superpower. Like you see yourself for your strengths and weaknesses, or limitations, as I like to say, rather than just a weakness, because usually that doesn't sit well with a man's psyche, right? Oh no, I'm not weak, I don't do this, but I'm like, okay,
yeah.
Anything
and on that as well, like another thing to say as well is just, regardless of what gender you are, if you are experiencing this, like it's not a failure in any way. Like you're not a weak person because of it. Because a question I get asked quite a lot when I do this is, if you could go back and do it all again, what would you do differently? And the answer to that always has to be, I wouldn't do anything differently, because this was my journey. This is how I went. This is the path that I went down, and this is kind of made me who I am, and all the rest of it. But I say that just to realize to people that, I went through this, but I wasn't failing when I went through it. That was just where my mentality was at the time. That's where my psychology was at the time. And I dealt with it, and we came out the other side, because there's always someone there to help. There's always someone there to guide you through it. So anyone that is kind of feeling like this and is ashamed of it and doesn't want to talk to anyone about it, it's not a failure. It doesn't make you a weak person. It doesn't make you lesser. You are where you are, and the people that can help you are out there, and they will help, and you'll get to where you want to be.
And at the end of the day, brother, you've now become this idol at the end of the day, this role model of like, oh, you can. Well, I know what you're going to be thinking. Like the Manc mind is just like, no, like I'm no one special. But at the end of the day, man, like you came through that. Like, yeah, okay, you've had support. Everyone needs support. Like no one is ever truly self-made. Like you come out of another human being to walk this earth. Like you're not self-made, but at the same time, you have to do the work, brother, at the end of the day. And now people are going to be able to look to you as a positive example, right? Which is what we call a role model, and be like, oh, well, if this fella from North Manchester can do it, then I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get myself through it, And I think highlighting the fact of it's okay to struggle with that as a man, and also highlighting the fact of it's okay regardless of any gender, right? This is an issue. It's not related to anything, right? It's not like, oh no, it's only a woman's issue. It's only this issue. It's only that issue. Like, no, it's a fucking issue. Like it's your mental health, right? It's a problem that we can all fall down the trap, right? Sometimes you walk over a trap door and it doesn't get pulled. Sometimes you walk over it and it gets pulled. That's just the luck of the draw. Like that's the way your psyche is reacted to the environment that you're in or whatever. And I think you've been open about it and honest is seriously helped and helping a lot of people, mate. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I just try and normalize the conversation. The more people that hear me talking about it, like, they will realize it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that we shouldn't talk about. Like, I don't feel embarrassed or ashamed that I went through any of it, because, like I say, it was my journey. I went where I went and I came out of it, and anyone else can too. So I'm just I don't want to be called brave. I don't want to be, said that I'm brave having this conversation, because I am just trying to normalize the conversation. It needs to be said. It should be said. We should hear it more often, because there's a lot more men out there that deal with this than statistics will ever be able to tell you.
Yes, because we are notorious for not using our words, right? And,
right. Yeah.
Keeping it in with your old fucking noggin. So I got 3 questions. All right, number 1, what's the greatest piece of life advice you've ever received?
Life advice. Do you know, I'm going to go back to my late coach again, because I remember him saying one thing to me this one time that I've used in so many different areas of my life, and I know he meant it in terms of running, but I've used it for everything. Let me get the word in right, because he basically said, to do the same thing twice and expect a different outcome is the definition of insanity. And I know, because there was a lot of races that I was running that I would run exactly the same tactics every time, and then I would finish in the same position in the race and not lose the race, basically, and not try and do things differently. So he was just trying to encourage me to read the race more. But I've used that so many times in life, like in work, in my training, in my nutrition, in relationships, in everything. To do the same thing twice and expect a different outcome is the definition of insanity. It's really useful.
Yes, sir. What's the worst piece of life advice you've ever received?
The worst piece? Oh, God. We've already said it, haven't we? Man up. Yeah. Oh, my God, man up. If I hear that said to me one more time. Because it just assumes that, man up means you can't have any sort of weakness, or you can't be doing anything wrong. Or it assumes that whatever it was that I was engaging in before you said man up means that I'm not a man. Like, I just can't tolerate that. And again, I'll come on and do a whole other podcast about toxic masculinity if you like, because it's quite irritating.
Sounds great. We can deep dive into that.
Man up is bad news for male mental health, I think. So I guess it's exactly the same as I guess women get told the same sort of thing as well. Women get told to man up, don't they? Which is just ridiculous. But yeah, man up is the worst piece. Let's not get into it.
It would just be 2 pissed off Mancs throwing things around the room.
We'll go for another hour.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. No. I'll always jump into that, and it's yeah, it's definitely something that has left a few scars for a lot of people, myself included. And yeah, if I am on the same page, I'm probably going to be the first one that starts swinging at a guy that was like, man up.
Good.
Anyway, last one. 3 words you would tell your younger self.
My younger self. Oh God. Patience.
Oh wow.
Can I use the same word 3 times? Just be patient. How about that? Just be patient. It goes back to what I was saying about being all or nothing. Everything that I've ever done in life, like, I've wanted it now, and I've wanted it instantly, and I've wanted it immediately, and I've kind of pushed myself to breaking point sometimes to get those things done quicker than I should have. 20 pounds in 2 weeks was stupid. There's a healthier way to do these things, and the right people could have helped me to do that. But even with my performance, like, I want to be running fast now. I don't want to have to wait 5 years and do the training and the time for it. Relationships, work, everything that I do, I want it now, and I want it all now. And if in everything that I was doing, if I'd just be patient, work away at it, and just wait, be patient, I would have gone probably so much better in life. I think I would have had a lot more calmness about myself anyway, instead of constantly trying to force the issue all the time.
Yeah, you'd have a lot less anxiety, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because you can't. I'm a high achiever. Want everything for myself right now, as soon as possible, and it's caused me some mental grief over the years.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people can relate to that, brother. So you're not in that boat alone,
Yeah.
Brother, I appreciate your time, man. It's always nice to hear another Manc accent. And mate, we can go round 2 for a little bit of toxic masculinity if you want in.
Let's do it, yeah.
Mate,
people to listen. I mean, I've seen some of the podcasts that you've been putting out there, and I know you're doing really good work and trying to get the message out there to people. So thank you for being a medium for that.
I appreciate it, man. Like, I just chat some shit, you know, and it's you guys that bring the knowledge. I just bring a lot of shit chat and a hell of a lot of swearing that's involved in that too. But, you know, as you know, from being from Manchester, it is just a culture.
Yeah. Sometimes that's all it needs, just someone to listen to someone that sounds familiar and friendly enough, and just listen to what they've got to say. I would hope I sound friendly. Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it, mate. Like, I'll flick you a message when in fact, I'll stop recording. Hold on. You ready? Yeah. Bye, everybody.